Okay, I think we can start. Welcome everyone to this edition of VSET. It's good to see so many people today. Today we have a pleasure of hosting Alessandro Bonatti from MIT, who is going to present a paper, The Economics of Large Language Models, Token Allocation, Fine-Tuning, and Optimal Pricing. This is joint work with Dirk Bergemann and Alex Smolin, and I've seen both of them in the audience. And also, we welcome our panelists today, Ron Siegel and Frank Young. The first hour is a talk from Alessandro with interjections from our panelists. So that's our usual format. Then we follow this with 15 minutes of Q&A. And this is where the audience can join as well. I think chat is open as well, I believe. The talk is recorded for this hour and 15 minutes, but after that we'll finish the meeting official part. We'll stop the recording, and if you have any further questions or want to discuss, then please stay and we can discuss. Next week we have Suraj Maladi from Northwestern presenting guarantees in price experimentations. Okay, Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Max. Thank you all for inviting us to share our new work with all of you. We were commenting on how a little awkward it feels to give Zoom seminars, but how grateful we are for the opportunity to connect with so many people, especially in farther parts of the world. This is joint work with Alex, who I'm looking at, and Dirk, who's on the Zoom as well. And thank you especially to Frank and Ron for agreeing to lead the discussion. The generative AI update that slide every single time because it's growing. So my favorite number that's not on the slide is that OpenAI has concluded $1 trillion of deals this year alone. Okay, so it's growing. It's important. All of us use it one way or the other. This work is going to be focused on selling access to a pre-trained AI model, okay? And I'm going to start by giving you some overview of how that happens, and then tell you how we choose to model that, and which aspects we choose to focus on, and which approach we want to take. I forgot, I should have also said, the paper is undergoing a vast transformation, so this was just luck, but this is actually the perfect time to give a talk and get your comments. If you ask how LLMs or large language models or OpenAI or AI services are, I think most of us are familiar with the subscriptions that, for example, you can get for Chinese version. As consumers, most of the time, that's what we face. But if you look at the broader market, a lot of the use of these models comes from application programming interfaces or APIs, where you can think of business customers uploading code and querying the model
Recording in
you
progress.
don't do by typing, in a way that you don't do by typing on a chatbot. Okay, and if you look at how OpenAI's, so the same ChatGPT models are accessible, say from a business users, then you will see that they're not priced as a subscription. They're priced piecewise linearly, really, depending on which tokens you are trying to buy. And I'll be specific about what that means. But there's at least a couple of different pricing models depending on whether the model has been fine-tuned. Okay, that means whether you've updated its parameters by training it on some of your uploaded data. Okay. Even more so, if you look at a competitor of OpenAI, this is Anthropic for the Claude models, they also are priced by input-output fine-tuning tokens, but they're also priced by the size of the request. Okay, so in a way that the volume at which you're using it actually affects the unit price. So there are various forms of price discrimination in this model. There are various forms of just pricing outright, even if there were only one product. And all of these are relevant. Okay, so this slide, which is actually compiled by AI, suggests that depending on the model, you might sell more subscriptions or more API access. So OpenAI actually makes 3/4 of its revenue from subscriptions, like the one that MIT has. Anthropic flips it completely. It's mostly accessed by businesses and others through the API. Gemini also doesn't sell subscriptions, so it's essentially also all API. What I'm trying to suggest here is that there's an open question of how should these models be priced. There's a lot of variety of practices in the industry, both at the level of discriminating within a pricing strategy and just different approaches to how you're going to monetize this product that you've created. And there are also large uses downstream that us as consumers, but businesses even more, can make of this technology. Okay. So all of this suggests to us as theorists that we might want to take a step back and slow down from this super quickly evolving marketplace and abstract and aggregate and think seriously about what are the economics of selling this product. Okay? With the understanding that there are a lot of other economics, like training this product and R&D and developing it and regulating it, that should be the object of follow-on work. And when we think about how to price these models, it's sort of very salient on the slides that I showed you before, that there's various kinds of ways the price can fine-tuning tokens. Tokens is when you upload a text and you want ChatGPT to proofread it. Output token is whatever it spits out. It could be your same text, or it could be that I ask write a story for my children, and the output is what we get, and it's measured in some units called tokens. And fine-tuning could be the papers that you upload to your ChatGPT persona, saying, okay, this is who I am, write in my style. Okay, or the entire email server of your company that you provide as context for everything that your chatbot, say on Copilot or something, will want to do. Okay, where am I going with this? I'm going that, yeah, we need to abstract, yeah, we need to take a step back, but we also need to allow for a highly dimensional world, both in the types of products like tokens that get used and in the types of uses that consumers will make. So I gave you proofreading, write a story, write an email, and that's just sort of personal experience. If you take it to an entire company that's using this, you can imagine how many of those are. Okay. So with that sort of longish introduction, what are we going to do? We're going to set up a multidimensional but really tractable screening problem with the following high-level features. The buyer doesn't just buy the good, it uses the good to solve a variety of tasks. Tasks are solved with a different level of quality, really, or value, depending on how you combine various types of inputs, think those tokens, and on how the model is trained. Some of these inputs are going to be queries, so they're really task specific, while some others, like uploading your entire company's email server, improve value on all tasks. They're more like an investment variable. And buyers are going to have a very rich type, which means they put very different values on a number of different tasks. The goal of the paper in that sense is simple. It's what is the optimal menu of items? Right? What is an item? It could be subscription levels. It could be API pricing models. It could be negotiated one-on-one access terms, like the one that MIT has, the enterprise ChatGPT with OpenAI. Okay, and what is the optimal menu?
Alessandro?
Yeah.
Just going back to the first line, it says monopoly pricing of LLMs. I understand that monopoly is the first case you want to look at, but the motivating slide showed a bunch of different AIs. I wonder to what extent in reality are they in separate markets, or are they actually competing, and whether you see a correlation between competition and pricing models?
That is a great non-planted question. So the first line should really say pricing of LLMs with market power, because it's clear that there are a few of these providers, and they all think they can make money, and they're all charging. It's true that there's cost, but it's also true that they are charging significant amounts. And of course, as you know, I'm going to say, okay, and therefore monopoly is the first step. We're going to begin with the monopoly model. However, if I time this right, and it's not clear that I will, the plan is to start taking steps towards actually modeling competing LLMs, again, in the sense of having trained their models and competing in how they price them. I think there's another super interesting avenue here, which is, okay, we're going to compete in developing them. That's not what you asked. The half a step or one step that we've taken and that I want to share with you is a world where we have a monopolist proprietary LLM provider that competes against an open source, so like a competitive fringe, like an open source provider of models like Facebook's Llama. Okay, so that's what we have in the slides for today. Oligopoly would be next, but it's probably for a different paper. Great. I was going to tell you that this is a very limited literature review slide. It's focused on multidimensional mechanism design. It connects to earlier work that the three of us have on selling information and on emerging work on even empirical AI pricing. I'm going to show you some pictures from the paper by my colleague Mert Demirer on various providers' market shares, precisely to Ron's question. Let me pause and see if anybody else has any questions. And otherwise, we'll get to the model. All right. So our buyer is going to use the model to execute a continuum of tasks. On each of these tasks, I in 0, 1, the buyer is going to use a variety of inputs. In the slides that I had, there were two kinds of per task tokens. They were called input and output, the text you upload, the text you get back, and one class of fine-tuning tokens, the emails or your own papers that you upload. The model allows for a finite number of, but arbitrary, of either one. What is the production technology? Okay, here we call it precision. Think of this as the creation of quality of an answer on a given task question. Okay, and it's called a gain function because it wants to be evocative of statistical learning and precision of the answer. Okay, the gain function is going to be multiplicatively separable in terms that involve task-specific tokens, input and output, and the fine-tuning tokens. Okay, and we're going to be relatively general on the role of the fine-tuning tokens that don't have an I subscript. So those are just contribute to the precision on every task via a strictly concave function, capital Phi. Whereas we're going to assume that all kinds of J variable tokens produce precision on task I according to a CES production function with returns sigma, okay, up there. To some extent, this is the most general thing we can do. And to another extent, this is both tractable and it's in line with diminishing returns to throwing tokens at a given problem, which is in line with the observed scaling laws of how much information do you need to how much you need to spend to produce an answer of a given quantity. These are engineering scaling laws. These are not economic scaling laws that I'm referring to. Okay. The easiest example is a Cobb-Douglas gain function, where you're going to have exponents alpha, beta, and gamma that sum to 1 or less. And you can think of 1 as input, 2 as output, and the z here as token with a baseline level. I'm not going to use this example, but there were a lot of subscripts on the previous slide. If you want to think that it's a 3-factor, or in fact even just 2-factor Cobb-Douglas, then it's completely fine. The important thing to remember is that there's going to be some things that depend on the task and some that don't. That again acts as an investment, as a productivity shifter on all of these tasks, and that's what we call fine-tuning. Now, what is the buyer's type? Well, the buyer's type is the value that the buyer assigns to precision, so to the gain on each task. So the buyer's type is just a function from 0, 1 into the positive reals. It's the value that buyer W, so the entire sort of infinitely dimensional type, is the value that this buyer assigns if you've taken all tokens xi on each of the I tasks, and z fine-tuning tokens is the integral of theta times q, really, but in this case, wi times g in this case. Okay, so buyer is going to be quasi-linear in money. T is what you pay to the LLM to access the model. Let me complete the description, and then I'll talk about what to do with this problem. We know that a lot of the cost for LLMs is in training them from scratch. There are also significant costs of processing, and we're going to assume that those are constant marginal costs. So each token of class J costs Cj to the producer, and each fine-tuning token of class K costs C hat K to the producer. The seller maximizes profits, which is just transfers minus the cost.
Just a quick clarification, if possible. You interpreted some of the tokens as output tokens, which is something that the AI outputs. Why is that costly in the same way that input is costly to the buyer to produce?
So good question. The costs are all on the producer side here. The cost to the buyer is just going to be T, the payment that you make. It's because you need to process. There are two different tasks, right? I upload the text and I want you to proofread it. You first need to read my text and understand what it's about. That costs you C1. Then you need to come up with a list of typos and adjust tests. That costs you C2 because it's a different task. They're both costly. And if you want to adjust the fine-tuning parameters of your model to the 3 papers that I uploaded, and then I asked you to write like me, then that's CK. That's a completely different activity. It's a way of modifying some of the billions of parameters of the statistical model to better match my writing style. There's probably better examples. Okay.
Sorry, can I ask, because maybe I missed this? This cost, how should they be understood? Is it like energy cost, or is it like a worker there who is shoveling those items there, or how should I understood this cost?
I mean, it's cost of okay. Angela, we'll come back to the type. You should think of this as compute cost. So it's not just power. You need to run. You need to run a server farm or a cloud server and compute. Surely power is a big component of that, but it's not just power, right? Anthropic runs a lot of it on AWS and on the Google Cloud. You have to pay them somehow. So that's one. And should you think of WI as a density? You should just no, because we want to allow. Good question, but no, we want to allow for buyers who are higher and lower, and so we don't want all of these types to integrate to the same number. You should just think of it as a positive function. Okay, and of course, when I say this and then I say we're going to screen these buyers, you should be thinking that this problem is completely intractable. And in fact, I'm going to show you ways in which it becomes incredibly tractable, which I'm about to talk about. Okay, so but don't think that we've solved an incredibly vast and open problem. I think we made progress, but this is how we conceptualize it, and then I'll show you the classes that we can solve. So the buyer's type, this arbitrary positive function from defined on 0, 1, has a distribution f, like all types in a screening model. And what does the seller offer? We're going to work, of course, with direct mechanisms, which you can also represent as direct menus of items and transfers. Items, this is a capital I, are part of the design, as are the payments. In the paper, we look at 2 classes of items. So mechanisms in which you assign token budgets. So you tell me your type, I tell you how much you pay, and how many total variable tokens and total fine-tuning tokens you have, and then you decide, it's an allowance, and you decide how to split it across the tasks. We also look at a stronger set of contracting instruments, which is you tell me your type, and I give you exactly an allocation of tokens that you're going to put on each individual task. So contracting on how much you can use for each specific activity. Okay. Today, I'm going to be talking about the budgets. The budget case, the distributions case is in the paper under stronger conditions. Okay. So you really want to think of, I don't know exactly how many of you use it, but when you're using a model on ChatGPT, at some point, you're going to run out of queries and run out of uses of a certain model. That's the world that we'll be living in.
Can I ask a question?
Go.
Is there is there a sense in which the model is just like about kind of a transferable, like intelligent agents? Like you can hire a team of PhD students. There's now like a big difference between what is the difference? Kind of, is there like a special thing about the AI, or is just about kind of a general intelligence that's solving a bunch of tasks? And there was just thinking about how to price such a thing.
If I am, tell me if this answers it. AI is a technology, an LLM is a tool. As such, it's itself an input into a decision problem. Whenever you are pricing a technology, you are selling something, and you better keep in mind the fact that this is going to be used by the buyer to do something else. Okay, so the buyer's use of the technology is what determines the demand function. This was true in the work on selling information. It's true if you're selling physical inputs into a factory. At this level, I am not. It's true if you're hiring a team of workers because they're a technology that produces something for you. At that level, I'm not at all bothered by the similarity. I think but my co-authors can disagree. I think as modelers, what we try to do now is to capture as many sort of relevant details of the context, like the multiplicity of tasks, like the multidimensional nature of what the object is, like some restrictions on the contracting environment, right? For example, on the budgets, right? Like you would when you're hiring a worker and say, well, the restriction is that I'm going to pay them a wage, that I'm not going to contract on a number of things. These are modeling choices at this stage, right? So it's we should discuss all of them, but I think part of the point is that it's a GPT, right? It's a general purpose technology, and so we want to take seriously the idea that these tokens and this stuff that our seller is selling, they're production factors.
Yep.
Sorry for the preaching, but I think this is how we're approaching it. Okay, let's get on with some results. What would the social planner do? there's a buyer, they value tokens, there's a cost of processing these tokens because somebody needs to run the computing. Which tokens would the social planner assign to which task? Okay. In general, the entire profile of valuations for the buyer will matter in determining the allocation, the efficient allocation. Why? Because the value assigned to a task tells me how much I want to input and output consume on that task, but also, as Angel was asking, so in some sense, the integral of my W's tells me how much I want to fine tune, and how much I fine tune, because inputs are substitutes, also tells me how much I want to process in input and output. So that's in principle complicated, even in the social planners version. However, the CES structure for the part of the game function that is task specific simplifies things drastically. If you define an aggregate type with convenient notation theta to be a macro or trade literature looking aggregate of the buyer's otherwise infinite dimensional type, then it is really pencil and paper easy to show that in the socially efficient allocation, the aggregate type theta, which now lives in R, is what matters for what? For the efficient total number of tokens of all kinds consumed by the buyer, and for the buyer's payoff, in fact, the social surplus generated by the social planner from buyer type boldface W. That doesn't mean that all types theta assign the tokens the same way, because two buyers with the same theta are going to anyway look at their WIs when they're deciding how to assign the tokens, but they're going to consume the same total number of all kinds of tokens, and they're going to obtain the same payoff. Okay, so those two things are measurable with respect to the aggregate data. And perhaps a little surprisingly, but maybe not, because the fine-tuning is this multiplicative productivity shifter outside the X part, we didn't have to assume really anything other than concavity on the fine-tuning function. This whole CES restriction only applied to the variable part. And so the other thing that we've learned, because I didn't say, but we've learned it, is that the aggregate type, the only parameter here is sigma. Those are the return to scale of that CES part. And the aggregate is going to be the same even across two different fine-tuning technologies. That is, to some extent, unexpected and very helpful, so that we only need to carry. And I only need to remind you about one part of the production function. Okay, so this is what the planner would do. The planner would look at the buyer's entire type when deciding the allocation of the tokens, but in terms of payoffs and totals, they only need to look at the aggregate type. Now we're going to leverage this result. Let's go to what the monopolist wants to do. We're going to leverage this result to solve, in fact, a one-dimensional screening problem on the part of the monopolist, as opposed to a prohibitively complicated model where we will be screening these entire functions, WI. Alex doesn't look very happy, which means that he probably wants me to say we could, of course, screen these very complicated WI functions, in part using some tools that Ron has developed. If we literally assume that there were two types of buyers, but in greater generality, this would be significantly difficult. So let's stick to the contracting on the total number of tokens. Let me remind you what the mechanism is going to be. It's a direct mechanism. You tell me your type W, I give you a transfer, a total number of, call them input tokens, for example. This is a vector. And the total number of fine-tuning tokens, that's also a vector of all kinds. And then you, buyer, you decide what to do with them. So when you look at it like this, this is a complicated mechanism design problem. The buyer's type is infinite dimensional. The allocation is multidimensional. And there's moral hazard in the sense that the buyer is going to take an action after having contracted with you, because then they choose how to allocate the budgets that they just bought. Okay, and so this kind of goes back to what I was telling Frank 10 minutes ago, which is we are acquiring this technology, the buyer has option value because they can use this technology in many ways, and that creates more surplus because they get to optimize. But that also might empower deviations in the sense of misreporting. So there's, in principle, this is complicated. In our case, this ends up being rather tractable. So what I want to do in our case is show you how you solve this problem. And it's going to be in 2 steps. The first step is going to be the buyer's problem, literally from first year micro. You have acquired now a budget of tokens. You have paid for them. You've given the T to the seller. How are you going to allocate them across tasks? Step 2, what value does that generate? Step 3, how much value does the seller want to give you? Step 4, let's solve the producer's problem then. What is the cheapest way for the seller to give you that value? That's the plan. So a buyer with type W who has budgets X and Z of these kinds of tokens, what do they solve? Well, they have the Z. That's fine tuning. They've put it in their fee function, and that helps them. Now they have to choose how to allocate the XIs across each task. Okay? Remember that there might be many kinds of them, so indexed by J, and then anyway, for each J, you have a budget XJ of tasks, of tokens, and you're going to put them across this entire continuum of tasks. So that's what XIJ is, the number of J variable tokens that you're going to put on task I. Okay, this is literally a consumer's problem with a budget constraint. What solution does this problem have? Because the psi function here is CES, it has a very elegant solution. The indirect utility of the buyer, so the payoff of a buyer with budgets X and Z, it's as if the buyer had a one-dimensional type theta. We've seen it before. It's the same thing. And then as if this buyer with a one-dimensional type were to put all the fine-tuning tokens in the fine-tuning function. That's a given. And it's as if the buyer saw the representative task in which they put the entire budget of the variable tokens. Okay, and that multiplicatively separable formula is the buyer's value. So you can just call it theta times Q, as in Rosen, where the Q now is an aggregate quality measure given by the best possible use of a budget X and Z that you're given to this buyer. Okay, so the buyer is going to solve this, in the background once they've contracted with the seller. But when they show up to contracting with and buying from the seller, what do they care about is their aggregate type. We've seen it before, and the aggregate quality that the seller is going to provide them. So now all we need to do is find what is the cheapest way for the seller to generate aggregate quality Q. That's the production function, the production decision. And B, as in all screening problems, which Q do I want to give to which theta? And that's it. So let's talk about that. What is the cost minimization problem? It is to find exactly how many of these token budgets you want to give to a given buyer type, so that when they're used optimally, they generate this aggregate quality capital Q. We have a formula. It's not important to give it here. This generates a strictly increasing and strictly convex cost function, as in Musa and Rosen, with C prime of 0 equals 0, so that now we've literally reduced the problem to buyer's utilities theta times Q, and then there's a cost of producing the Q. Okay, so now the screening part is more than tractable. It's known. So let me complete the description, but then see what it implies for our particular case. So what is the optimal menu of token budgets? It's a collection of capital X's, capital Z's, and transfers. What are the X's and the Z's? Well, they are the cost minimizing inputs now for the seller that minimize the cost of production of a given aggregate quality Q theta. Okay. What is the Q theta you want to give to the buyer? Marginal cost equals virtual value, as in all screening problems. Okay. So once we have it here, it's a textbook formula. But what this implies on the back end for how you allocate is how you assign budgets to the buyer, and how the buyer allocates the budget to the tasks is all downstream, and we solved it in the previous slides. So let me say a couple more things, and then I'll pause for questions. Okay, we solved the Musain-Rosen problem, but what does this mean? Well, first of all, like in the socially efficient solution, all types W with the same aggregate data, they pick the same item from the seller's menu. In fact, they only need to report their data. Which item does type theta now pick? Well, a type whose quality is downward distorted and is in all quality pricing models. But what does it mean that the quality is distorted? It would mean that if I went back, if I picked this type with this aggregate data, and I went back to what the social planner would want to give to this buyer in terms of X's and Z's, then the social planner would assign larger budgets of tokens to this buyer. It does not mean that the way the variable and fine-tuning token produce the value that the buyer cares about is not that. So distortion in quality, there's a constraint, there's efficient production for that level of quality. And this can be the theorem, or the time release theorem, or a recent paper on it with title, this Dojalski et al. And Piotr Boszak, who's one of the authors. Yeah, the optimal way to measure is indeed to screen. They're inefficient, there's distortions, it's monopoly pricing, but the conditional on the distortion in quality you're giving to the buyer, you're going to produce efficiently, because in that sense, monopolist is the residual claimant of the efficiency gains. Okay, so this is the welfare picture that comes out. If you want to think about in a simpler world, what would this menu actually look like? Our favorite special case in the paper is one where the buyer is two-dimensional, not infinitely dimensional. The function that Angel and I were talking about before is a rectangle. It has height W, that's all tasks, and base S, meaning that you only care about S tasks, S is less than 1. For this two-dimensional type, there's some tasks I care about, some I don't, and the ones I care about, I value them at W, and there's two-dimensional heterogeneity. Then it's easy to draw the level curves of the aggregate type. They look like you kind of would expect. And along the iso-theta lines, all buyers are going to pay the same. They're going to get the same surplus and the same value. They're going to get the same budgets. They're not going to use them the same way. And incentive compatibility constraints are going to bind from one line to the next. Okay, so you can think of orthogonally along each iso-theta line. Okay? But so what this means is that yeah, it's important that you can solve this and talk about the efficiency properties. It's also important to point out that in this sense, we totally do expect price discrimination to take place, given that you have a seller with market power, but that the richness or the sophistication of the menus is, in our general case, infinitely simpler than the underlying richness in the type structure. Okay? So you go from an infinite dimensional type to a one-dimensional type. Yes, here the allocation is still continuous, but it responds to much less than differences in types. Okay, so this is, I think this is what I want you to take home, rather than having a different point on each budget item on each point in the square. You're really pulling together all of these iso-theta lines. I've talked a lot. Let me see if anybody has any questions.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
How is the quality variable aggregated?
Let me give you two answers. You me which one you mean. The quality variable is literally defined as the gain function. The product of capital psi and capital phi is what I call G, the gain function. So the quality is defined as the precision, the gain function, the production function, call it the precision of a task, on a representative task, where you put your entire budget of tokens. So that is that is the aggregate quality of a given budget. That's just a definition. The resulting dilemma is that the buyer's utility of a given budget can be written as the aggregate type times the aggregate quality.
Okay.
The next
the
next step is, okay, how do I determine it? And that's the usual monopoly. I'm sorry, and C is the indirect cost, is the cost function.
So then the cost function is a function of the quality, and this is coming from some kind of cost on the
yes,
inputs.
It's coming from Mascolel cost minimization problem. Okay, so you have a linear production cost in your outputs, in your inputs. I'm sorry, in the tokens you're going to generate. You know that you need to somehow pick a total number of these variable and fixed inputs, so that when you pass them to the gain function, you generate the target quality level. There is a unique cost minimizing way of generating that value. And given that the buyer only cares about the queue, surely the seller is going to produce the queue in the cheapest way.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks for slowing this down.
Also another question.
Yeah.
So seems like the CS coefficient here is very important. How do the firm, like in practice, like what would be an exercise to kind of figure out what is the CS coefficient? What would be like observable differences that I should look at into?
That's a great question. I feel like for a use case, okay, the answer here is going to be that a richer model would have the CES, the sigma, the intensity parameter, depend on use. Here for now, this is what we can do. I think for a given use, I can imagine a large number of experiments that Anthropic could run to figure out essentially the returns to scale on its own technology. Right? To figure out how you're going to break it down, input and output. Well, it's kind of Cobb-Douglas. You can look at the expenditure shares, but to figure out sort of the returns to scale, I think you can somehow randomize quotas and see how often, for coding, for example, randomize quotas of these and then see how often the coder comes back because you haven't solved the task efficiently. Right? So I can think of A/B tests. It's a theory talk, and I can imagine. Okay, I can think of ways to do it, but I think the honest answer is I can think of ways to do it at the level of a use of the model, which doesn't mean a task in the sense of the model. That would be a specific coding instance, but I would sort of separate it by coding, text reading, text generation, customer service, chatbot. Okay, and I think a better model here would have sigma that's also heterogeneous in that sense, but we're running up against some complexity.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another question is, how do you think about, is this model like an enterprise pricing model, or you think about this is also a similar model to the consumers? Like, how do you distinguish between, seems like the offer, like the menu they offer is very different from the consumer facing side and the enterprise facing side. Do you view this model as a way to explain both of them, or just focusing mostly on enterprise side, or you can have a way to kind of understand the consumer side? Seems like the quality differentiation or like the quantity screening here resembles more on the on the firm side. So I was curious, kind of, how do you think about?
It's interesting that you think that it resembles more the firm side. I think sort of cosmetically, the budgets case looks a little more like subscriptions. Like, oh, you can query this model, but up to 10 times in a month, and then you run out of queries. We have deliberately not tried to sort of tailor the model to one of these users specifically. I think the budget, we hope it can speak to both in some sense without being a consulting project on either one. So the budgets thing, I think, captures quite well the subscriptions. The other thing that I want to talk about now is the fact that this model can be implemented by a menu of two-part tariffs, as in Muskin and Riley. That now starts looking more like the enterprise thing that they maybe reminded you of, where you sort into a budget, but as usual, that budget is implemented by a fixed charge and a variable per token price, like in the API slides that I showed you before, that makes it such that then you're going to consume exactly what the budget would have been. Okay, so that starts looking like that. With the Muskin and Riley result, that this type of model would then yield quantity discounts, so that the enterprise customers would trade off a higher fixed part with a lower variable price if they're going to use what would have been really a larger budget here. We see some of that in the of this lower variable charge for a higher sort of menus of two-part tariffs. We suspect that there will be a lot more going on in the large customer that we don't see. Every time you ChatGPT, this is MIT, ChatGPT, and the will not be. I don't know what the rated institute is that they open AI. I'm sure all the customers. The technical captures large. Okay, so in the interest of time, let me go ahead. Some of you may wonder, okay, you've chosen to look at token budgets. They look like subscriptions. They look like what firms do in practice. Can this ever be optimal? The answer is yes, but under very, very restrictive conditions that map to a classic by Mark Armstrong in '96 in Econometrica. In fact, they're the same conditions. And I'm going to skip that, but there is a formal connection to Mark's work that that will spell out in the paper. That's if you wonder whether offering a budget in the first place is optimal at all. Okay, and the answer is rarely, but it can be. Now, given that we're having I think a more applied discussion, so what does this model look like? Let me go back to what I promised to Ron very, very early on in the talk. Okay, and let me start with the real world so that you all know what's going on, and then I'll tell you how we try to contribute some theory to it. Okay, so in the world, there are multiple models, and that means many things. That means there are multiple providers. There are multiple strategies because there are multiple kinds of providers. Some charge consumers and some charge very little. Think DeepSeek. And of course, each provider doesn't only price discriminate access to a model, they also offer multiple models themselves. So there's a lot of product variety. What do we want to do? We want to do LLM pricing with multiple competing models. We want to think about the social planner. We want to think about non-competing models because they're all held by the same monopolist. And we want to think about a leader versus a competitive fringe. Those are the results I want to show you today. But let me just tell you what's happening. Okay. These are the market shares on the platform openrouter.com for all the Anthropic models used by, think this is business customers, okay, used by on this website. It's a platform. It's a way to access a bunch of different models. It's a provider of different models. Okay, all of this data is from Demirer and Fratkin. It's super exciting ongoing work. What do I want you to see is that, the colors change because new models get introduced over time. This is over the last year, less than a year, 9 months. But that at a given point in time, especially today, different models have positive market shares and significant market shares. That's true for Claude. It's even more true for all the Gemini family from Google. You look at now, is everybody using the best Gemini model? No, there's a number of different models being used. Some solve some tasks better than some others. Some are just better than some others, but both get used. That's true for Google. This is true for the Llama versions by Meta. These are all open source, and they come in many different versions. And it seems like at least 3 of them have a market share of at least 25. And increasingly over time, this used to be a lot of blue here. Now there's a lot of different colors. It's true for OpenAI GPT as well. So this is not a phenomenon that's confined to one of these providers. So multiple models get used at the provider level. You already know that all 3 or 4 of these examples, they all have significant market shares at the firm level. So the consumers split their purchases or sort into more than one provider. And then one thing you may not know is that if you look at proprietary versus open source ones, well, they are both very significant. This is the closed source versus open source market share over time, and it's coming up on 50-50. It was 3-to-1 for almost a year, but it was 3-to-1. It wasn't 3-to-1. So both of them have a significant presence. What have we done so far on this? And I told you that this is not in the paper, but it will be very soon. A way to think about multiple models. So relative to the single model with the phi of the Z and then the CES part that we showed before, now the models are indexed by calligraphic L. And the production function has one extra assumption, which is that both pieces are CES. So not just the variable part, but also the way the fine-tuning kinds of tokens interact, papers and emails, HR records and memos interact to fine-tune a given model. That's also CES. The other assumption is that across models, back to Frank's question, the sigma parameter remains constant. Okay, so that is simplifying, but it is important. So that per task intensity is constant at the model level, whereas the returns to fine-tuning can change however they want. That's the gamma parameter up there, the returns to fine-tuning. Everything else, the model, the token-specific parameters, the cost parameters, everything can vary freely. Across models. Here it's written for 2 models. It could be a buyer do. Well, the buyer has the same type, has the same preferences for value, for gains across the different tasks. Each buyer can use different models if they want, but they cannot use different models for the same task. So that if you use all tasks in a set, IL, if you use model L for a given set of tasks, then you are going to use the relative gain function for those tasks and G1 and G2 for those 2 subsets. Okay, it's what you think it is. Okay. As before, we're going to define the aggregate quality as the gain at the model level now by using a given budget of tokens through a model on a representative task, and sweeping a lot of algebra at this point, especially in the day after the run under the rug, which involves how does the agent optimize allocation of budgets across tasks and allocation of tasks to models, you can show that the buyer's indirect utility function is, in some sense, surprisingly tractable. It becomes itself a CES aggregate with a common parameter sigma of the aggregate quality that you're using across the two models. Okay, so the fact that it can just be written as Q1 plus Q2 with exponents aggregate with intensity sigma, this is once you have taken the budgets of tokens and you've then optimally decided which task you're gonna, which model you're gonna use for which task. Okay, so this is at the end of the buyer's optimization problem. Type theta is the same aggregate as before. Also, lots of algebra, but particularly convenient, that the cost function that we talked about 15 minutes ago at the model level is a power function in a way that depends on the CES4. Okay. Now, as I said, we can do many things. We can say, okay, what would the social planner do? What would a multi-product monopolist, multi-model monopolist do? I think the most interesting thing, and I want to finish the talk with that, is what will a leader do, think a proprietary provider, against a competitive fringe, think the Llama family by Meta. So we're going to have a leader that has a common cost parameter, which is strictly positive, and a certain return to fine-tuning. And we're going to make them compete with a fringe, meaning somebody who sells at cost, who is more efficient, so has lower computation costs, it's a smaller model, and also lower returns to fine-tuning, because it's a smaller model, you gain less by personalizing it. That's going to lead to a different cost function. Okay? It's competition, but it's really a monopoly problem with an outside option, because the fringe is going to price at cost. So that we've set. And in the interest of time, let me just say that tractability keeps on spilling over in perhaps a way that even surprised us. The way this problem is going to look like, it's very similar to exclusive dealing papers or limit pricing papers. Let me just jump to the result, which essentially says, as the leader, I can choose whether to, looking at a type, I can choose whether to not serve them to keep prices high, serve them and give them so many tokens that they don't need to use the fringe to supplement what they bought from me. Okay? Or they like me so much because they love fine-tuning that I can serve them what a monopolist would do, taking care of the rents, and they're just organically not going to go to the fringe because they one-stop shop here. So the solution in this case is going to have, with the assumptions you can see on the slide, is going to have two thresholds. The lowest types only buy from the fringe. The middle types only buy from the leader, but the leader has to give them more than they would want, more than the leader would like to give them, so that they don't go to the fringe. It's some limit pricing constraint, you can call it that. And then a top end that is very happy to buy from the leader at essentially monopoly conditions. And I'll explain what this picture is, and then I'll just stop. This picture is meant to show the distortions that market power imposes on the use of the best model in this economy, which is the leader's model. The continuous line is the quantity of the best model that the social planner would give to all of these types data. And what this is telling you is that above 0.2 something, the social planner would assign the best model to these types. This lower line down here, this is the quantity of tokens, or quality really, from the best model that the leader gives to these types when it's competing against the fringe. And so, yeah, it's lower, but also it's the intercept is further to the right, meaning there's some types that it will be efficient to give the best model to, but the leader doesn't, even when they're competing against the fringe. So everybody below 0.28 or whatever this is, they buy from the fringe in the case that I just gave you. Okay. The weirdly dashed thing here is what happens under multi-model monopoly. Okay. On the multi-model monopoly, anybody below 0.6, so even more than before, would buy the bad model. That, you know, it's just even more distortion because there's a multi-model monopolist. So in the case that I just showed you, this is the limit quality. This is what you have to give to these types so that they don't use the fringe. And then above 0.62 or whatever that is, then again, I told you the leader acts as a monopolist because the fringe is no longer a threat for these high types. Okay. And I'm just going to essentially end on this picture to show you, so just visually, what the gap to efficiency is, both in terms of aggregate quality and in terms of model assignment, because even on the extensive margin, this higher quality product does not get assigned to some intermediate or lower valuation buyers. Okay. So the result is there, but all of this part is work in progress. The next step, according to us, for this in this agenda would be competition of differentiated LLMs, like of strategic LLMs. We want to think about investment. We want to think about training the models. We want to think about regulating them. We want to think about vertical integration, because you can access the Anthropic models on the Google platform, and you can also access the Google models on the Google platform. So there's a rich network of supply relationships under integration or non-integration. So there is a lot of theory and a lot of I/O that's going to have to happen here. Is the constructive message that I'd like to end on. And I think I've spoken more than enough, but very happy to get your questions and to hear your reactions. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Thanks. That was a great talk. We are moving to the Q&A session. So as it's usually the custom, we will start with our panelists today. If they have any questions, Ron?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to follow up on one of Frank's earlier questions. And now that we've seen the whole setup, what would you say are the kind of distinguishing features that make this problem or this production kind of specific to this technology as opposed to many other production technologies with just buyers that have linked tasks? So I'm trying to see if there's something special really about the production technology or the linkage of many tasks for any given buyer, or is it the combination or something else? How are you thinking about this as being special?
It makes complete sense.
If that makes sense. I don't know.
I think the more elements we start looking at, sort of the more we narrow the set of environments it can apply to. So, and then if we don't get a singleton, I think that's fine. By linked tasks, I should steal that term about buying a technology with some sort of general productivity component and some task specific component. I think that's a great way to put it. The fact that this general technology, computing might be another one, sure, can be used for a significant number of things. I didn't show you, but we talked about them privately. The results on where you actually do assign tokens to each task, and then you can literally control a continuum in principle, a continuum of activities. I think for something that's called general purpose technology, we think that's a good match. By difference, what do I think is missing, here? There's a lot, we've called it gain function, but we called it a production function, and we wanted to focus on the pricing side. I think I'm not speaking for my co-authors, but a more descriptive way would have been one where we actually put a Bayesian or statistical structure on what a task is. Right? It's not building a widget of a given quality with linked in linked dimensions, but there's actually a decision problem. There's a hidden state, maybe a task specific or correlated across task hidden state that the buyer is trying to solve. sort of we've gone this way to have more power on the pricing menu side. But I think a key distinctive feature of LLMs is that, you know, they are prediction devices. You search them to find the best fitting answer to a given question. That is a prediction problem. That's not it can be cast as a production problem through the gain function, but I think that's it's a very convenient shorthand.
Good. And can I ask a second question? What would you say is so one way to view this project, this paper, is to say, hey, we're looking at this novel technology. We're proposing a model which may initially seem intractable, and we're solving it, and here are some technical features and so on, and here's the characterization. And that's kind of a methodological, conceptual contribution. Another is to say, no, we've actually learned, here's a lesson about some aspects of LLM which we didn't know before, or would be surprising, or should guide us in our thinking. How do you view this? Is there something in the latter that we can take away from this?
Yeah. So thank you for pushing us in this direction. It would be too cheap to say, oh, the linear pricing is suboptimal, even though we have talked to some participants who are like, well, you know, you tell us what to do. So I'm not trying to say, oh, the results match what's happening, because the industry is not in steady state. We have learned that the complexity of the uses of the technology need not translate into the complexity of pricing. Okay, that's a little bit through the simplifying assumptions, but if they make sense, then one wants to take them seriously. We have learned that this idea that was in some of the first slides, that you price more a fine-tuned. This was weird. You price a fine-tuned token, an output and input token for a fine-tuned model more than for a normal model. And you also charge for the fine-tuning itself. We thought that was strange at first, but I think if you look at the menus of two-part tariffs implementation of what I showed, I think we think it actually comes out. Our menu is richer than what's on this slide. This is essentially 2 items, and so then it would have the quantity discounts part. But this one seems like a good idea. We have learned, but okay, you should have expected that if you had the power of contracting at the task level and you could handle that heterogeneity both in the theory and in the practice, and that would be valuable. Okay? We haven't talked about that because I only showed you budgets, but that is, and I think it's the newest results that I'm most excited about from a practical perspective. I think a lot has to do with what are the welfare implications of market power in this new industry, and this idea that you're going to have distortions across paid and essentially free models. They're not essentially free; they're priced at cost, and the cost is positive, but they're open source. The idea that you're going to have distortions, which model gets used. I think all of those are going to be very important going forward. If you think about industry dynamics, right? I don't think we had a way of in general, the industry dynamics are hard, and I don't think we have a way of thinking about them in the context of a GPT of any kind. So I think that as you can see, I'm grateful for the question. I'm building the answer as we speak, but we have a few places where we're happy with more than tractability.
Thank you.
Thank you. Frank, any comments or questions?
So just build on that. I think one thing I learned conceptually, I think is it is a distinguishing feature for these large language models that the contractability is much less contractable compared to lots of other stuff, right? You can talk to the LLM. It's very hard to specify exactly you can talk to it and you cannot talk to it. And you can always get around with that. So I think somehow this kind of the fact that you couldn't contract on fine details actually limits the screening in a sense that reduce the dimensionality, I think is a nice insight. And actually, I think is a pretty suitable model for this type of general technology, like considering what exactly you're getting.
That's a point. And then when we in a more horizontal, I've talked about high thetas and low thetas because of aggregation, but in a more horizontal heterogeneity model, then you would really want to start thinking about the product offering at the model level. So I can't quite contract. I can tell what you're asking me, but I can't contract on the type of query you make. And so the one way I'm going to get around that, which has also technological advantages, is, I'm going to develop a model that's great for coding, so I can price coding, and I'm going to get another model that's great for children, so hopefully they don't use it, but okay, that is good for that, and that would be a way of segmenting the buyer. It's not in the paper now, but in along dimensions, as you said, they're maybe observable but not contractable right now.
Okay. Great, fantastic. We have a couple more minutes. Any other questions from the audience or speculations? Yeah, Angel?
Go ahead. Let me stop the sharing so that so we can all see each other better. That's a great suggestion. We haven't, and in our one-dimensional aggregate, as a couple of you have already pointed out, it's an aggregate. It's a one-dimensional aggregate that depends on a very small number of parameters, in fact, one. And so there's surely a connection. There's a connection. You can compute. The way I think I want to operationalize this is starting from the same distribution of underlying types W, the high dimensional ones, different intensities to task usage, the parameter sigma that was everywhere, will lead to different distributions of theta. It's that's for sure, because it's just a change of variable. So that will impact the distortions, because in the canonical way, but through a channel that I for one had not thought about at all. So thank you. Like that, the underlying buyers might be the same way, but if you change the way they're aggregated, surely the distribution of the payoff relevant type then is going to be different. And in fact, we're going to have, because it's a one parameter family, it's an exponent, I'm sure it's going to have some nice properties. So that's something that for sure we should explore.
Okay, great. I think we can slowly converge to the official finish. So if we can stop the recording.